Assalamu alaikum. Donald Trump has openly declared that he wants to change the regime in Iran. That means destroying the current government and installing someone who's going to play nice with the United States and Israel. Today I want to look at America's history of regime change in the Muslim world and how those operations have turned out. Then we'll see if regime change in Iran is even possible. The United States has been involved in multiple regime changes in the Muslim world recently. Of course, there's the 2003 invasion of Iraq, which led to the toppling of Saddam Hussein. The result of that was several years of civil war within Iraq. Currently, Iraq is much safer and more stable than it has been in the past, but Iraq is basically a vassal of the United States. The United States controls Iraq's financial system, and by controlling Iraq's financial system, the U.S. also controls Iraq's government. Furthermore, the U.S. still maintains 2 military bases in Iraq, so, there's that. There was also the toppling of the Taliban in Afghanistan in 2001. Once the Taliban were toppled, the United States proceeded to prop up a new puppet government that lasted roughly 20 years. The puppet government was toppled by the Taliban, which never really went away, in 2021. But this new Taliban was more sophisticated, had better weapons, had more legitimacy, and was more battle-tested than the original Taliban. Currently, there are no U.S. military bases in Afghanistan, and the U.S. and Afghanistan have very little diplomatic relations. The U.S. does not recognize the Taliban government, and the Taliban does not recognize Israel. Then there was the 2011 toppling of Muammar Gaddafi in Libya. The United States and NATO provided air support for rebel forces fighting against Gaddafi's government. Once Gaddafi was killed and his government toppled, Libya then descended into civil war with fighting between various factions. Currently, Libya remains divided between its two largest factions, though a ceasefire is in place. While there's no fighting at the moment, there's also very little hope that Libya will become a functioning state anytime soon. Now on to Yemen. From 2015 to 2021, the GCC, which is a coalition of Gulf states, led a campaign to topple the Houthis in Yemen. The United States was not directly involved in this conflict, but the campaign wouldn't have lasted as long as it did without U.S. support. The United States provided mid-air fueling for the GCC aircraft. The United States provided intelligence and satellite imagery for the GCC as well. And of course, the U.S. sold billions of dollars in weapons to the GCC. Currently, the diplomatic rift between Saudi Arabia and the UAE has effectively ended the Anti-Houthi coalition. However, both Saudi Arabia and the UAE still support rival factions fighting in Yemen. Finally, there's the 2024 toppling of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. The United States was not as involved in this regime change as it was in some of the others. The United States did provide weapons to some of the rebel factions, and it launched limited airstrikes against Syria in 2017. The U.S. also basically occupied Syria's oil-producing areas, which, along with economic sanctions, financially crippled the Assad regime. And while the United States certainly wanted the Assad regime to fall, Turkey had more direct influence on the final outcome. In all of these regime change operations, the primary goal of the United States has been stability and access to those nations' natural resources. If we use that as a barometer of success, then Iraq was the only successful regime change. And that success cost over 1 million lives, trillions of dollars, an economic recession, and about 2 decades. The only country that has truly benefited from these regime change operations is Israel. Israel benefits from a weakened, divided, and chaotic Middle East. A chaotic Middle East bolsters Israel's image of a stable, modern nation amongst a bunch of barbarians. Chaos also justifies Israel's own military-industrial complex, and it also justifies continuous military and financial aid flowing from the West into Israel. Now, I want to make it clear that I'm not justifying the U.S. war in Iran, nor in any of these other nations. All of these wars, including the current war in Iran, are morally reprehensible. Regime change is just a modern name for imperialism. But I do want to analyze this question of regime change with as little bias as possible. Simply put, yes, it is possible to topple the current regime in Iran, that is, the Islamic Republic of Iran. But there are significant differences between Iran and other countries where regime change has taken place. Iraq and Libya were nations that were led by strongmen, and once the guy at the top was taken out, the entire system collapsed. The Assad regime in Syria was also led by a strongman, but on top of that, it was also a religious minority. Without outside support, there's no way the Assad regime could have lasted as long as it did. And once Russia got distracted by the war in Ukraine, the Assad regime could no longer hold on to power, and it collapsed. Iran is not like Iraq, Libya, or Syria. It is not ruled by a single dictator. It is not ruled by a religious minority, and it is not completely dependent on other nations. The supreme leader of Iran definitely holds significant power, but his role is similar to that of the premier of China. The supreme leader in Iran controls the military and the foreign policy, but he doesn't run the entire country like a typical dictator. If the supreme leader dies or is killed, the rest of the government bureaucracy continues to function. There's also this idea that perhaps dissident factions in Iran might eventually rise up to overthrow the Islamic Republic. Yes, there are many Iranians that hate their current government, but there are also many Iranians that also like the current government. And while many Iranians do hate the current regime, they probably hate Israel more. Why would these people put their lives on the line for Israel? Another strange idea that's been floated is supporting a Kurdish rebellion. That has to be possibly the dumbest idea I've ever heard. The Iranian Kurds are predominantly Sunni. That means they're not only an ethnic minority, they're also a religious minority. Even with U.S. power to support them, how far could the Kurds really go in taking over the entire nation, or even defeating Iran's entire military? Now, using the Kurds would definitely create chaos in Iran, and that benefits Israel, but it won't lead to a pro-U.S. or pro-Israel government. Now, there is a possibility that a portion of the military could break off and rebel against the government. But again, would a significant part of Iran's military be willing to fight and die for Israel? Most Americans don't want to fight and die for Israel. Why would Iranians, even secular Iranians, want to do that? The bottom line is this: if the United States wants regime change in Iran, it's going to have to do it itself. First of all, do not underestimate Shia martyr culture. It is not the same as Sunni martyr ideology. It is on a whole different level. So let me give you an example of the Shia martyr culture. So I'm just going to do a search in Google for Shia Nasheeds. Let's go down to this Reddit, the subreddit for Shia Nasheeds. Going to click a link here, and I'm just going to pick a random one from this list. I don't know what it's about. Let's go straight to the transcript. Where is it at? Okay, here we go. Click on the transcript link. I'm going to copy and paste all of this out. All right, now I'm going to go to my AI of choice, which is Google Gemini. All right, let's paste in what I just copied. I'm going to ask Google or Gemini, whatever, to translate this nasheed. Now let's take a look at some of these lyrics, okay? Begins with Hussein, 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 Hussein. All right, we got that. Now, then it says, Hussein, behold, my country has performed ablution with blood, and mourning is in its soil. Tents where every day was Ashura, here is the south reciting the elegies. Behold, my country has performed ablution with blood. Oh my God. And mourning is in its soil. Tents where every day was Ashura, here is the south reciting the elegies. This year is like no other. Blood, tears, estrangement, orphans. The people of martyrdom are servants, servants of Hussein. May Allah's blessings be upon you, our belief whose echo in our neighborhood resounded. May Allah's blessings be upon you, the voice of our land which was wounded and its sand bled, heading towards Karbala. It tells the story of every Akbar, referring to Ali al-Akbar. That's one of Ali's sons. When he departed and made his family cry, if he smelled musk in his battlefield, it is his master, his master. May Allah's blessing be upon you. Towards his light he strove as he crossed the barricade. Here a mother stood at every door, raising the Quran above the heads, and for Hussein with a memory comes. Heartbroken she mourns her son. At your service, O Abba Abdullah, may Allah's blessing be upon you, the voice of everyone who perished, lying down and covered in dust. Right? Yeah, tell you, man, their martyr culture is different. Here's how I believe things will play out in Iran. U.S. and Israeli airstrikes will continue for a few months. The U.S. and Israel will run out of military and government targets and will strike civilian targets instead. They're going to use the same BS excuses that Israel used in Gaza and say that Iranian soldiers were hiding behind human shields. Images of these civilian deaths will make their way back to the United States, causing massive outrage and protests. As the midterm elections approach, many candidates, especially Democrats, will run on the promise of limiting Trump's war powers in Iran. And then Donald Trump is going to do either one of two things. He might declare victory even though the Iranian government is still in place, and he'll say something like, we'll just try to work with the new supreme leader, and he'll call that regime change, and basically everything's going to go back to the status quo. Or he might send in ground troops. If he sends in ground troops, there is no going back to status quo. Historically, American legislators have supported the president during war, and Donald Trump might be hoping that even if the Democrats win, they will support him. However, unlike Iraq in 2003, this war in Iran is an unpopular war. Most Americans don't want it. I don't think many Democrats will win any elections unless they promise to oppose Donald Trump all the way. And that's the contradiction the United States is going to have to deal with. The American public does not want a ground war in Iran, but there is no way to overthrow a regime without troops on the ground. The GCC tried to do that in Yemen, and the Houthis are still there. And you know Israel ain't sending no troops into Iran, so it's going to just be the United States. An American ground invasion of Iran would be catastrophic for the United States. It will either lead to another forever war or a humiliating withdrawal. So that's going to do it for today. Click the video on the left to learn more about the Houthis of Yemen, and click the playlist on the right to see the history of the Middle East after World War I.